Hello.
Hi,
How are you
can you
doing?
hear me?
Yep.
See, we have a computer room. When I say we, I mean my wife and I.
Mm-hmm.
And she is currently playing a computer game with her mother and
Uh-huh.
sister in the USA.
Uh-huh.
She doesn't get there very often. And so I'm trying to do this where she can still talk to her mom through Skype and whatnot.
Uh-huh.
So I just want to make sure that this is functional. You can hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Um, so I guess I must have set this up so that it was more of a chat than a controlled debate. That's my preference.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I say this at the beginning of most of my debates
Mm-hmm.
that I'm perfectly happy to be wrong. I get involved in a debate because I find it a useful way to think about things. I'm sort of. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't care if I win or I lose, unless it's
Mm-hmm.
in the tournament, then I care.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
so I guess we should get started. So
Mm-hmm.
virginity is overrated, and I'd sort of like to explain what I mean by that.
Mm-hmm.
And so hold on here just for a sec.
Mm-hmm.
And am I still on your screen?
No, 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 no. You're out of it.
Okay,
I
I'll
just can
flip back then.
see. Okay.
I was hoping that I have notes, right? And they're in a notepad application. I was hoping I'd be able to toggle back and forth, but I guess not. All right, that sucks. Um, so when I say
Mm-hmm.
virginity, I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking about the uh, the state of having never had sexual intercourse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and do you mind if I am slightly vulgar? I'm not
Uh-huh.
fond of being euphemistic overly,
Uh-huh.
right? So I could refer to fellatio and whatnot, but I would rather just call it what is normally referred to
Mm-hmm.
blowjob,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're uncomfortable with that, I'll use the euphemisms.
No, that's fine. Anything you're
Okay,
good with. Uh-huh.
so you know, um, so I'm going with sort of the old school definition of virgin, as in involving actual uh, penetration
Mm-hmm.
of a vagina by a penis,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and I find the definition of virginity interesting
Mm-hmm.
because it is the state of having never had sexual intercourse. And that wording makes it sound like the instant uh, that a woman, or I suppose a man, is penetrated, that they undergo a state change of some sort, um, and lots of the vocabulary uh, pertaining to one's loss of virginity or virginity period also suggests that. So if you think about words like virtue and purity and innocence, um, those are all terms that we use when we're describing good things. If you're not pure anymore,
Mm-hmm.
then you are polluted and contaminated and soiled, right?
Mm-hmm.
And um, I think this is an important subject. Uh, I guess I should digress here and look at the word overrated. So, overrated is there's more hype or praise or value attributed to something, whatever it is, than it deserves. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, um, although my apologies not for more explicitly stating this in the topic, um, the overratedness
Mm-hmm.
attached to virginity is actually something that's harmful. Um, Harmful for women. It's about power and control more than anything else. I have two daughters, um, and I never saddled them with that baggage. Loss of virginity was not a big deal, um,
Mm-hmm.
and I have lots and lots. And this might be a generational thing. I'm 56, right? Might be a
Mm-hmm.
generational. I have so many female friends. I've had like two male friends in my whole life who have felt
Mm-hmm.
like shit for literal decades because when they were a teenager or maybe in their 20s, they had sex
Mm-hmm.
and voluntary. It was a decision that they made, but they felt like shit about it, like they had somehow betrayed their future husband, beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the vocabulary that was directed towards them by a lot of unpleasant people was slut, skank, whore, slag, where the vocabulary directed towards men,
Mm-hmm.
you were a you were a dude, you were victorious, you were a conquering hero, you know. Um, Men get laid, uh, women make mistakes. And I don't like that. I don't like it even a little bit. Um, Sort of repulses me. So that's sort of where I'm going with this. And I'm passing it over to you.
Okay. So this is definitely a very interesting topic because yeah, it's not something that's so much looked at by people, and then it's something that just, that just maybe talked about once in a while. So I really like this topic when you brought it, but I have a bit different stance on this idea. So for me, I think talking about today's present context, virginity is not overrated. I think it was a thing before. I definitely agree that maybe decades ago, maybe like 40, 50 years ago, I have seen myself in the community I lived in, like, how much preference it was given, like, so it was a lot of things that comprised in a society, and then that you were considered of maybe having a good value only if you were virgin. So it was definitely overrated, but in today's context, I definitely do not agree to it. So I think we rather have a slight change on the, like, on the context. No, I think losing virginity is actually overrated today. So that's kind of the stance I have on this one. So I think it's there's actually a statistics which I'll just tell you before beginning. So there was a thing that today virgins make up 12.3% of females and 14.3% of males, aged maybe like 20 to 24. So when we talk about overrated, we know that that's something that's given like high importance to, or that's something that people believe should be exercised because, like, it's a high value, it will put you in a maybe bigger position, or that kind of thing when you talk about overrated. But given the statistics, like, we see there's a very less percent of females and males who are actually virgins today. So as I said, the context is now different. So now losing virginity is actually overrated. And then I think there's a lot of different factors that come into play when we talk about why losing virginity is so much in practice today. I think it's a lot about like the teenage pressure and everything, like, and then I think it just has become a kind of necessity among people. So it's not something that even like you would actually um maybe choose to have or maybe choose not to have. It's definitely like, an option, but still like now it's in a way forceful as well, because like you're not open to talk to your friends that you are a virgin, we are still a virgin or something like that. So if in case I'll just give you a random example of it. So if in case I'm with maybe a group of my like girlfriends, and then so if they are talking about each of us having boyfriends or not, so any any so if in case like there's sorry sorry about that. So if in case there's any girl like who does not have a boyfriend, so the girl would actually um kind of like feel uncomfortable in then expressing it. So it's just the same thing with virginity as well. If in case there's a group of people and then everybody is like, hey, like I did it. I mean, definitely there's people express it negatively as well, like sometimes, but like I did it. I'm no more a virgin or anything. So it has now become a sense of pride, a sense of like, if for boys it could be like a sense of masculinity, and then for women, like, more about maybe freedom, my independence, like, just being able to, I think so that they have a control on their lives, but definitely not positively in this case. Like, sometimes, people are doing it for their choice, like for the people they love, that's definitely their choice. But sometimes it's kind of the pressure that people are being put in because it's something that almost everyone does. So that's what the image of virginity, like, is right now. So I think not being virgin is actually high on play today, because I think, yeah, that is so much in practice today, that there's a lot of pressure from teenagers, like, to their friends and all. And I think also this idea of, being able to do something, because I think people are very rebellious today. So being able to do something that is challenging, or I know they should just be a very minor concept on it, but still, like, being able to do something that's actually not acceptable, I think people feel good on that. So even that has actually maybe fueled this idea of being a non-virgin. And then, yeah, so I'll be talking about this side of the topic even more. But yeah, I think I'll just pass on the mic to you.
No, I appreciate what you've said. Um, I I'm assuming that I'm probably 30 years old. I have no idea how old you are. You look about 25, right? Um, and I'm 56, right? There's lots of things generationally that I miss, especially since I've lived outside of the United States for 20 years. I lived in England for 11, and I lived in South Korea for 9.
Mhm.
Um, and so I don't actually very frequently uh, communicate people with people who are from my own age and or my native cultural background. Most of my time I've been talking with Koreans, and the situation is quite a bit different here. I mean, number one, most men and women live at home until they're in their 30s. Um, I have friends, lots of them, whose mom still makes them lunch every day that they bring to work. And they're 35, and it's like they've never stopped,
Mhm.
right? They still see their family every weekend. I mean, I've seen my parents, you know, 5 times in the last 15 years, probably, right?
Mhm.
Um, but everybody's having sex here, I think, right? But it's a huge no-no for couples to live together. A matter of fact, you'll still be disowned here by your family. if it's not that it doesn't happen, but you have to pretend that it's not happening. It has to be done slyly. Um, so, I understand what you're saying, though, that I think you're telling me that there's been so much societal change that it's now rare to still be a virgin, rare not to be one, or at least all I can really say to that, and I'm agreeing with you basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
But about, okay, I've never known a woman in my life who
Mm-hmm.
ever lied about the number of partners, as in inflating the number of partners she's had.
Mm-hmm.
But every teenage boy, every young man that I've ever known in my life, if he was still a virgin, he'd slept with 10 women. I'm exaggerating a little bit here. But if he'd had sex with one or two women, had sex with 15. For whatever reason, socially, men, especially young men, like to have a more impressive tally. Yeah. So the percentages that you gave, I will believe overall, but I suspect that there is some male inflation.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something that dudes do, guys do. Um, I don't know. I have no idea
Mm-hmm.
where you're from, so I don't know your um, uh, cultural background. Um, so I don't really know how to compare.
Mm-hmm.
Are you in? Are you in the West, or I guess I'm trying to ask that awkward question. Apologize for it. I hate asking.
No, that's fine. Where do you think I'm from?
Uh, I would guess that you were from India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, something like that. Because I
Uh-huh.
lived in the UK for 11 years, and I literally was sort of cool. I literally had neighbors on my left who were from India, neighbors on my right who were from Bangladesh, and neighbors across the hallway who were from Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
And it was cool. I've been a fan since I've been a little boy of Tamil and Bollywood films,
Oh my
even
gosh.
even the bad ones.
Uh-huh. But
Uh,
I'm from Nepal actually. Have you heard of Nepal?
well, sure. Um, I was a member in university of lots of different student organizations, and there was a Nepalese organization that was sort of, I don't want to say that there was the Indian students organization,
Mm-hmm.
but the Nepal organization worked with but was still separate.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, in
um,
fact, like Nepalese, Indians, Bangladeshi, and Pakistani and Sri Lankan, like we all look kind of similar. So it's very difficult. I mean, like I, as a native of like Nepal, I would be able to identify like who is from India or from Pakistan. But if in case there's an outsider who's looking at all five of us, it'll just be the same. We just look similar. So
are the foods similar?
sorry.
Are
Uh,
the foods similar?
the food.
The cuisine, is the
Yeah, it's
cuisine
it's
similar?
similar to, yes. I mean, in fact, almost most of the things are similar, like the culture we follow, the food, our skin tone, like the way we, like, yeah, behave. I think a lot of those things are similar in terms of this case.
Okay.
So,
So,
in fact,
um,
go ahead. Sorry.
you go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay, so in fact, like Nepal, India, like the religions and everything, this, I mean, this even like counts a lot. And the fact about virginity is actually a big thing, like, coming from those kind of that country. And then like I've seen India as well. So I think virginity is something that's as you said, like, that was actually given much value to. But okay, the thing is that, this thing is that I think the idea I have is that it's a lot in practice, like, so it's a lot in practice right now. Previously, there was an associated value that virginity is like um something that you should have, like that will actually put you in a good status or something, put you as a good person or something. And then, so that is how virginity was actually practiced before. But currently, like, what from what I've seen, I think it's very different, because um people are actually, more um into losing virginity. And then, as I said, like before, there are a lot of factors that actually comply with this. And the example you actually gave about how a boy maybe, oh my gosh, what is that?
It's my puppy. She wanted my attention. Sorry.
Oh my god, that is so cute.
She's my pup poodle.
Oh my
Oh,
God. I don't have it. I don't personally own it, but in my neighborhood, like there are 6 or 7 of these and they are very cute.
I love her to death, and I'm sitting on the against the headboard, and
Mhm.
she's jumped up just a minute ago and letting me know she wanted my attention. So
That's
I'm
sweet.
sorry for that derail.
And yeah, the thing about like those boys maybe not being expressive about is not because they actually want to um be considered, like they actually want to be considered a good person or something like that, but because there is a fear that is existing, like, that is existing, because like every time we break any rules or responsibilities, like in a family, we know that our parents are going to scold it, or our parents are going to be angry at us. So I think that's the fear that actually exists with this idea. So it is not valuing virginity, but it's the fear that actually comes from maybe not following a certain norm or rule. So the person not being able to express is not because he wants to be a virgin, like he wants to be called a virgin, like a person of, like, high virtue or something. It's because there's a fear existing behind that, of not being able to follow a norm or rule. So I think I see differently, like, that concept very differently here. And okay, and I think yep, so I don't really have anything on my mind right now, so I think you can just say anything, yeah, you have on your mind.
Um, I come from an evangelical Christian background,
Uh-huh.
sort of a Pentecostal background. Have you ever attended a Pentecostal church? With the speaking in tongues and all of that
Yes,
is
yes, because I have Bible classes. I'm going to a Christian school, even though I'm a Hindu, like I'm going to a Christian school. So I do have all Bible classes and all, so I know it.
interesting. That must be, yeah. I like that. I will ask you about that later. Maybe in a message. I'm curious.
Okay.
Um, uh, and so that background informs who I am partly, right? I'm an atheist, right?
Mhm.
I've been for about 30 years, but the saying, once a Catholic, always a Catholic,
Mhm.
or once some things, some belief systems have got their hooks in you, it's always there a little bit, right?
Mhm.
So um, I still respond to some things inside the same way that I would have when I was a believer.
Mhm.
But I guess the where I was going with this is that a huge number of my family and friends, I'm the black sheep.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for them,
Mm-hmm.
chastity until marriage is still a very major part of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm from a part of the United States uh, where, you know what the LDS Church is, Mormons?
No.
It's considered by some occult, and I think it actually does technically meet the definition. But they're a branch of Christianity, uh, very very conservative, and their largest concentration in the world is in the region of the United States that I'm from.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm living in America, uh, virginity is still a huge deal.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I mean, they still actually have, and this sort of turns my stomach,
Mm-hmm.
uh, chastity balls where you pledge to, and they give you a special ring, and you pledge to be a virgin until you're married, and
Okay.
you go with your dad. If you're a young girl, you go with your dad to a dance where you pledge to your father that you will still be a virgin when you get married. Now, the sad but also semi-humorous part is statistically people who make these pledges have anal sex before a lot of other people do, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like there's a very humorous song on YouTube uh, that talks about anal sex
Mm-hmm.
as you're still a virgin if you've only been penetrated anally. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
actually a very, very funny song, although it's vulgar. Two women singing.
Mm-hmm.
I'll send you a link because it's funny. I think you'd laugh. Um, so I'm pleased to hear, actually, very pleased to hear that uh, that things have changed so that you don't so that people don't feel uh, like they've been soiled by doing something that is natural to do. Um, and I'm going to have to be honest. Um, I'm surprised. I mean, you're from a part of the world which, as a as I've never been to India or that part of the
Mm-hmm.
world, I have a fairly my conception of people from that part of the world, I I guess was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because uh, there's the honor killing thing. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's the acid thrown in people's faces because they've pissed their boyfriend off or their husband off and whatnot. So those things don't match in my mind,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So I'm glad
Mm-hmm.
that things are freer
Mm-hmm.
than I had assumed.
Uh-huh.
Um, I have no idea whether any of the unpleasant things that I've just mentioned have any impact in Nepal at all. No
Mm-hmm.
idea. Um, but I am
Hmm.
very pleased that that in some ways that part of the world is more liberal
Hmm.
than the part of the world that I'm from, or at least the region of the part of the world that I'm from.
Hmm.
And I'll pass it back over to you.
Okay. Um, so I know that, like, in terms of Nepal, like, we had a lot of different wrong practices. Like, in fact, like, even menstruation was considered a kind of like, a bad term, even though, like, it is actually a good thing, but still, like, people conceive that it's an impure blood, or the person who is actually menstruating should not go to the kitchen, or, like, should not sleep in the bed, like they were supposed to sleep on the floor, so there were a lot of things. And then Nepal recently criminalized those kind of practices as well. So I mean, it didn't happen like quite recently, like, it's, I mean, given the time that we have been changing, have been progressive, so these things were already eliminating, but still I think Nepal did a good job by criminalizing it. So we definitely have had a lot of practices that's actually somewhat too much. And then even the idea of honor killing, there, that's really um this is actually, I don't really know of this practice in Nepal, but I know that in villages, or, like, in some rural areas, it definitely should have been there. And then um like acid throwing cases, I know that we have had those, like, in recent times. But it's, I think that we have been progressive in a certain way, but definitely there are some families who are too conservative, and then, like, who definitely carry the same values they had before, of maybe a woman should be married after, as soon as she, like, turns 20 or 21. So I've been to those families, I've seen those families. And then, like, there are people who actually believe that their like daughters should be controlled, they should not be wearing, like, maybe skirts or so. So there are definitely families who actually still think that way. But i I tend to look on the positive side of it, because I know that we have been hugely progressive than before. So it's something that's very commendable, because yeah, I mean, I myself have seen changes on that level. But for me, like, for me growing up, it was a very different thing, because my dad is a principal, like, mom is a teacher. So, and he has been a principal, like, since 35 years now. So he had this very different mindset. And then for us, so whatever the bad practices we had in our society, like, it never happened to me. And then, so for me, it's a very different case scenario. So whenever my friends ask me, like, how are Nepali families, so when I talk about myself, I tell them that please do not judge the rest of the families by looking at mine, because mine is very different. So for me, it was very different. And then, so I used to get in, like, debates and everything. So I was do training and all. So, I used to come home late night sometimes. It would be like 8 or 9. So my parents were totally fine with it. This just, like, my dad was always very open about it, that if in case I've taught you freedom, like, you definitely know the limits of your freedom, and then you definitely know how to exercise it. So I don't have to reiterate it, like, every time. So you know it. So that's how he, like, sold his trust to me. So I reciprocated the same. So it was very different in my case. But we definitely have families who are, like, control your daughter, like, and so, yeah, a lot of this kind of things. And but okay, so just getting to the topic, I have something to say on that part. So I think in today's time, because people are very much into, like, independence, like, my life, my choice. So even if in case, like, you cannot tell anyone that this is wrong, or you're addressing like incorrect, or you look bad, people, I think, like, jump into the fact that it's my life, my choice, like, so I think this sense is so much stated, this sense is actually so much valid today. And then people are actually practicing sexuality more, because that's also part of their freedom that they actually feel. So I think in terms now, when people are actually practicing more sexuality, I think they have more inclination, or they have more like, they actually, so this is just the fact, I actually have read that maybe people who are actually non-virgins would be a better partner, because they, like, they know that, I know this would be a very rough concept, but they know the techniques and everything, so they experience, like, so it'll be, it'll be actually good if in case I'm going to marry a non-virgin. So this is the kind of concept people have now, because I think practicing sexuality has been so much um into the play this time. So I think people actually prefer those kind of, like, people more. And secondly, I think the second thing that plays in this, if in case you know that someone is non-virgin, um so someone is a virgin, I think you actually, look at that person being like, old fashioned or too conservative, like, so I think that is also something that actually I think will come into account, because people will have this idea that, oh my gosh, like, you're so conservative, like you have not done that. If in case, like, you don't have a good iPhone today, or you don't have like a good phone today, you're like, oh my gosh, like, you're so old fashioned, you're still carrying that Nokia, like, so this same thing that applies actually. You're like, you're so old fashioned, like, you are you actually sticking to, like, all those things that virginity should be maintained or anything like that. So I think, now this is actually playing in a negative way, like, I think, so as I said, this also is one of the factors that actually pushes people to practice sexuality more or be a non-virgin. And then, yeah, I think this is quite the case right now. And yep. Yeah, my point.
No, I appreciate your point there. I it was actually a point that I was going to bring up, but you beat me to it. Um, I I can't really imagine. If you look at lists of the most common marital problems that lead to divorce, there's boundary issues, there's financial issues, there's communication issues, but issues of intimacy are up there really high. So I can't even imagine getting married to somebody who, if marriage is for life. I've been married 36 years to the same person.
Mhm.
I love her to death. I'm thankful every day for her. So, I've been lucky. Um, but it still doesn't mean that I could imagine having spent the last 36 years with someone who didn't like the same things in the bedroom that I do. And, I have a very good friend whose wife doesn't believe in sex outside of procreation. I mean, period. So they haven't even had sex. They had their kids, and sex was for making babies, and that was it. So they had sex once a month until they'd had 4 kids, uh, and then never had it again. Well, that's something that he didn't know, before they got married. But he's Roman Catholic, uh, and they love each other. But still, there's just some things you should know about your partner, and not everybody. There are some people who were fairly asexual, and that's okay as long as both partners are fairly asexual, right? But could you imagine spending ostensibly a lifetime with someone who you didn't like sharing a bed with? Uh, and I'm not talking about because they snored. Um, you know, I understand maybe in times past, for reasons of, how do I say this? There were advantages in knowing who the father of your children were, for reasons of growing families, so that, because daughters were essentially almost traded. And that was every place in the world. So you wanted to have better trade relations with a neighboring tribe, and so you would trade your daughter for theirs. You'd sort of swap your children around, and they wanted to be certain that the baby that arrived was from their tribe and not from yours, sort of thing. So historically, back in a long time ago, I understand maybe how the value of virginity evolved, but we're past that. We don't have to get pregnant anymore if we don't want to, and depending on your views of abortion, it's a safe procedure now because it's legal, at least in the US. Yeah, I don't know. That's all I have. What do you have?
um yeah, so I think okay. So I think yeah, I think there's definitely there was this concept before that virginity is something that should be that is like very good, or that is actually that actually puts you as a pure human being, and then that makes you a good human being and all. But I think given that today's context, it's very different, and then now people have more control on their lives, people are practicing their autonomy, and then I think that way even they are practicing more sexuality. So I think that's something that has always been restricted, like when people like grow up in a family, like people, I mean, in fact, like sex is not something that's even like talked in families, like so that's very weird. So I think this is something that they have always been like, suppressing, like even though they want to know something, like even though, so I've heard, like I have seen small babies like questioning, or small babies, or like, maybe teenagers questioning, not even teenagers, but like, 10 to 12 years people, like old children, like actually questioning their parents, like, how was I born or something, but,
Right.
the answer that comes is not the exact answer that comes in, or that's not, that's something that they just give a vague answer. Or so sex education is also something that's not so much into education today. So I think that also creates a big problem in how people are actually suppressing that side of their, like, life, or that side of the, like, life experience. So I think but today, like, is people are actually practicing more autonomy, and then I think that's something that'll just, that will be something very that'll actually increase more, bring more curiosity in them, because being a part of suppression, like, for a long time, I think that's something that will trigger more curiosity in them, and that will actually put them maybe likely into more practice for sex and everything. So I think the case is very different right now, and I think it's a bad trend if in case we have a trend of sex today. I think that's something I'd definitely say, because people are facing a lot of like peer pressure. In fact, like in a lot of colleges today, like, there, in fact, there was a record that, there would be any freshmen, like, who haven't had I think there was a joke or something like that, like, a very less percentage of freshmen would actually not be, would actually be virgins. So, just giving an idea that, how many people are into being not virgins. And then, so I think it's very different now. And so, yep, I think, yeah, the case has been different. And in fact, there was like a 1999 film, American Pie, which actually shows that the freshman year of college is the last, like, is the so late actually is the freshman year of college, when you can be, like, a non-virgin. So, like, just the practice of, sexuality should be way ahead. So that's what it suggests and everything. So yeah, I think it's a lot of in practice today, and then it's very different than um than what it was before. But I definitely do agree that it was overrated for a certain period of time.
So I guess we've sort of concluded that we agree with each other.